Everybody I have cared for has either died or left me. Everybody f***ing except for you!
Hey, what's up everyone? It's Ryan here from The Y, and today we're gonna be taking a look at The Last of Us. So whether you agree or disagree, the show has been a massive success. Going off the numbers, it had the second biggest premiere in HBO history at 4.7 million viewers. And from there, it's only grown in popularity, with episode 8 drawing an audience of 8.1 million. Close to a 100% increase from the beginning of the series. I believe this speaks to a few things. First off, the show was able to attract a large fan base purely based on name value, but also the rising viewership with every episode is a huge indicator that people are in fact enjoying what they're seeing regardless of the nostalgia for the game. As you likely already know, this is somewhat of a rare occurrence, as historically most video game adaptations have been, let's just say it, piss poor. I will admit, as time's gone by, they've gotten better and better. Most recently, The Witcher and Arcane specifically have been pretty damn good. But in my opinion, The Last of Us is the best adaptation of a video game to date. I know it's not a huge achievement considering the competition, yet this could also be a seminal moment in video game history which sets the blueprint on how to create a successful adaptation. Of course, there's no one factor responsible in the virality of The Last of Us, though when looking through the different components behind the show's popularity, one aspect stands above the rest. It's the story.
She found me after I was bitten.
And she didn't shoot you.
Clearly not.
Let's be honest, most video games just have a somewhat unengaging story compared to books, movies, or TV shows. And it's quite understandable, as none of those aforementioned mediums of entertainment have what video games have, which is gameplay. In many cases, how the player interacts with the game is what takes center stage, and the storyline essentially takes a backseat. This of course results in a less defined and thought out plot, meaning the dialogue isn't always up to scruff.
You were almost a Jill sandwich.
You're right. Barry, thanks for saving my life.
The voice acting could be better.
What? That really pisses me off.
And not to mention the fact that developers have to be cautious not to include too much story or too many cutscenes, lest they risk players skipping it altogether because they just want to play the game. In terms of video games, The Last of Us is probably the closest thing you'll find to a cinematic experience in a role-playing game. I'll say this about the story. It's simple yet effective, and in my opinion, it's really everything else surrounding the plot which elevates the whole thing to being iconic. By itself, a cynical, abrasive dude and a rebellious teenager traveling across the country doesn't make for that great of a tale, but add in superb voice acting.
Why are these all stuck together? I'm just with you.
Dialogue, pacing, and visuals. The result is a very compelling story. This brings me back to the many other video games that got adapted into film and didn't have this set-in-stone, polished story. How do you make a faithful adaptation when there isn't any dialogue that translates well over to a show, or plot points with coherent pacing that you can somewhat follow along with? The answer is it's much more difficult, and the only option you're really left with is to make it up yourself. And the more stuff you have to make up in an adaptation, the higher the chance you're gonna mess things up. The only thing that seems to translate well in a lot of adaptations are the visuals, but eye candy alone is never gonna make a show or movie watchable in any sense of the word. So, because The Last of Us already had a refined story, characters, and dialogue, it almost feels like one of their primary jobs was just to not mess things up. A major help in this regard was the hiring of Neil Druckmann, the creative director and writer behind the video game, who basically did the same thing on the show. And I mean, they really did a solid job translating the cutscenes over to television, with many of them being almost picture-perfect, word-for-word recreations. And I think as a fan of the game, that's exactly what you want to see. Take for example Sarah's infamous death sequence. Yes, there are some minor changes, but for the most part, I'd say it's as close as you can get to the original.
You're gonna be okay, baby. Stay with me. I'm gonna pick you up. I know, baby. I know it hurts.
I gotta get you up, okay? I gotta get you up. All right? You come on. You come on.
And by the way, this is what I mean by The Last of Us already coming in with a fully developed story. It reminds me of Jaime pushing Bran out the window in Game of Thrones, or even Breaking Bad with Walt's first cook. The hook in the game converts so well over to TV. All that was needed was to faithfully adapt it.
Stay right there. Don't move.
Going off that, even though they did an exceptional job of following the source material to a T, there comes a point in every adaptation where liberties have to be taken. Some adaptations are led astray when they change characters or storylines without a solid reason. You have to imagine a lot of it comes down to ego and trying to leave your mark, or just forcing certain things that don't make a ton of sense. Of course, it usually always turns out bad. Though for The Last of Us, this doesn't seem to be the case, as I feel like it's very easy to pinpoint the logic attached to many of the changes. Take for instance how they subbed out spores for tendrils.
How the hell are you breathing in this stuff?
I wasn't lying to you.
The fungus also grows underground. Long fibers like wires, some of them stretching over a mile.
The explanation that tendrils translate better to film in terms of dramatic effect makes a ton of sense, as well as the fact that making characters wear gas masks for parts of the show just wasn't feasible. Add on to this that tendrils were the original concept in the game before they settled on spores, and it doesn't seem all too outlandish. Looking at the portrayal of Joel and Ellie in this light, I guess you could say they're both accurate in a lot of ways, but also slightly distinct. I think it's a fair assessment that Joel in the adaptation is a bit softer than his video game counterpart, seeing as in the game he immediately breaks Robert's arm,
Just give me a couple.
shoots the guard without hesitation, and has a much more confrontational reunion with Tommy, all without batting an eye.
Bring you the cure from mankind, and you want to play the pissy little brother.
Granted, Joel's brutality was shown at different times in the adaptation, like when he killed the hunter begging for his life. But then you also have the scene where he breaks down in front of Tommy.
You want me to take her?
I'm just gonna get her killed. I know it. I know it. I have to leave her.
Which is never really even hinted at in the game. This is all to say, I actually think the slight changes made to his personality work better within the context of a TV show. Like I said, some departure from the video games is necessary, and having Joel finally open up to Tommy really humanized his character in a realistic way. I think about it like this. The video games portrayed Joel as probably the most prolific killer mankind's ever seen, all the while not giving a single But of course, that's not a sober outlook. This isn't an action movie, and Joel's not a superhero, so I think showing him as having some form of PTSD is a much more believable reality than him just feeling nothing at all.
It's all I do. It's all I've ever done. It's failure. Again.
On the other side of things, when we first met Ellie, I remember thinking, man, this isn't at all how I remember her in the game. However, I soon realized this was due to a couple reasons. Her and Marlene weren't friends at all in the show, so we don't get to see her friendly side till later.
How about we start with thank you?
For what?
For saving your life? I am the one who told him not to shoot you, if you recall.
Oh, shit. What happened?
Don't worry, this is fixable. I got his help.
And she was also just forced to kill her best friend, so she was obviously going through a lot more than the Ellie in the game. Other than that, I think Bella Ramsey brings a slightly sharper edge to the character of Ellie, though in the same breath, I feel like with every episode, she becomes harder and harder to distinguish from her video game equivalent. But whether Ellie and Joel are a tad different or exactly the same, the most important thing you have to remember is that their relationship and chemistry on screen is what really matters. And in that regard, I believe they absolutely did the game justice. From scenes that weren't in the original version,
It is so goddamn stupid.
You laughed, mother.
Laugh.
Yes, you did.
to events you've seen many times before.
It's me.
He tried to.
Oh, baby girl. It's okay.
It's me. It's me. It's okay.
But I...
They all succeeded in strengthening the relationship which the entire story is built upon. And talking about relationships, perhaps the biggest departure from the source material was episode 3, a series of flashbacks involving Bill and Frank that nobody asked for, but one that I think everybody was tearing up from by the end of their last day.
Then love me the way I want you to.
This was the episode that really got me emotionally involved with the show, and it's the perfect illustration of how to change the source material while still maintaining support from even the most diehard fans. Sure, they could have just followed along with the game and had Bill as a bitter, angry man, with some minor references to a lover he once had, which ended in heartbreak.
Well, him.
But I think if you're honest, it doesn't add much to the overall story of The Last of Us. And in addition, it doesn't translate over that well cinematically. In contrast, the story of Bill and Frank we ended up with is thematically in line with the rest of the show, representing the love you can develop for another person, the lengths you'll go to protect them, and also the grief associated with losing that person. Obviously, in Bill's case, the feeling was so intense he simply lost the will to live. The crucial takeaway from this episode is that it enhanced the story, and also, one can easily draw parallels relating back to Joel and Ellie. What I'm trying to say is that if you're gonna deviate from the original plotline, make sure the new idea is much better than whatever it is you're changing. Make sure there's a reason for it story-wise. And last but not least, find some way to tie it into the spirit of the show.
I'm satisfied. And you were my purpose.
So after heaping praise on The Last of Us for the past 10 minutes, I'd be remiss if I didn't go over a couple things I felt they could have done better. Cause even though they might have made the best adaptation ever, there's always room for improvement. Let's start with Kathleen. They simply missed the mark on this character for me. It's difficult to spell out exactly why she felt so lackluster. I understand what they were going for with trying to subvert expectations and all, but I guess I never felt the intensity or darkness that you'd expect from a killer who's out for revenge. It's almost like they portrayed her as being ruthless and lackadaisical at the same time, which is a strange combination.
When you're done, burn the bodies. It's faster.
And then she's so hellbent on finding Henry and making him pay, but when she finally does find him, she just seems more annoyed than anything. I guess I just assumed there'd be more passion or emotion from a person who obviously wasn't thinking straight. Maybe that's on me. Another issue I had with the show was its depiction of the University of Eastern Colorado. I know that there wasn't a ton of source material to go off of, but we literally got like 5 minutes here. And the way they changed Joel getting injured was one revision I'm not too fond of. That's not to say we needed a big action sequence with Joel getting fully impaled by a piece of rebar. However, I just think something in between what we got and the actual game would have been nice. Also, the final episode just felt way too short. Again, I know they weren't working with much video game wise, but I just think they missed a golden opportunity to improvise something fun between Joel and Ellie before the big finale. Those are really my only gripes with the show, and seeing as they're so minimal and ultimately inconsequential, you really can't ask for more than that.
Is there meteor?
That's terrible.
That was actually good.
Like I said before, hopefully this opens the door for more high quality adaptations in the future, as it's honestly just a lot of fun seeing games you put a lot of time into being adapted over to a different medium. Although it sort of feels like the stars just aligned on this one. I guess all that's needed is someone to pick out a game with a great story, characters, and dialogue, understand what it's all about inside and out, cast people who know what they're doing, do a faithful job in adapting the plot, know when you have to make a change, and do it so well that everyone forgives you for making an alteration. And if you do all of that correctly, you maybe have a chance at people not hating you for tarnishing their favorite game. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Sorta a different video this time, but I felt like I had to make it because this is really the first adaptation that's been exceptional. So make sure to leave a like and subscribe. Alright, till next time, have a great day everyone.